And not everything is about sales. We know that, there's other implications, investing in innovation and things like that. So certainly there are different places we can be investing in, whether it's, changing or increasing route to market, reaching consumers in different ways in light of a drive towards e-commerce. So understanding all those dynamics. But the one thing we can do with a high degree of confidence is highlight just what the implications are of pulling back.
Hi, everyone. It's Wednesday, May 19th. Thanks for listening to the Behind the Numbers ad platform, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm your host, Principal Analyst Nicole Perrin, and this is my platform to talk about advertising with some of the smartest and most interesting people I know. Joining me to do that today is Mike Menkes, SVP at Analytic Partners. Hey, Mike.
Hey, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Before we get started with the main part of our conversation, I'd love to introduce you and Analytic Partners a little bit more to our audience with a couple of little quick opening questions. First, tell us a little more about Analytic Partners. What kinds of companies are your clients, and what's the main problem that you're trying to help them solve?
Sure, yeah. So Analytic Partners, we're a global measurement and optimization solutions provider. We work with a variety of different types of clients to enable a deeper business understanding to help support better and faster decisioning. So we're independent. We work across the globe. Our client base is, across, like I said, a variety of industries, retail, electronics, auto, services, et cetera. And we're recognized leaders in the marketing measurement space in particular. So we focus a lot on understanding the role that marketing plays in understanding growth for different businesses, but also non-marketing, to be able to help with scenario planning and understanding paths to grow different brands.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking more about that. We're going to be talking a lot about measuring the results of your marketing and advertising and other things going on out in the world and how you can use that to grow market share. But first, second question about you. Before the show, I shared with you eMarketer's estimates of media consumption among U.S. adults. So can you share with listeners somewhere where you're a little bit weird, where you're a little bit of an outlier, whether that's because you watch or consume more or less than the average adult in a day?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's an interesting table of information, certainly. Yeah, so realistically, every person has different social and video accounts and experiences and behaviors. And, I know some of that's going to be driven by demographics and others based on, interests in their social circles. So, yeah, my consumption of media tends to be kind of centered around a little bit of social, in the morning, during the day, across different types of platforms, checking Facebook every once in a while. And then in the evenings, I tend to lean into some video. So, variety of different types of streaming options, a little bit of TV here and there, traditional good old DVR, but not as much these days, obviously, with the growth of Netflix and Hulu in there. So, yeah, in terms of differences, it's I don't have accounts for all of the different services that were listed there. Not to pick on any specifically, I would say I probably over-index a little bit on Disney Plus because I have 3 kids, so... So that's certainly going to be a factor, but...
That's a fun one. I love that you over-index on one of the newer services. And Disney Plus, it skyrocketed to both, subscribers and the amount of time that people were spending really for, basically the exact reason that you just mentioned, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the content's pretty good too, I'm not gonna lie.
Well, I can't deny it. I may have enjoyed some Disney Plus over the past few months myself. So cool. So let's move on to talking about marketing measurement and how brands can make sure that they're kind of making the most of their opportunities in the marketplace to grow their share. Early in the pandemic, there were a lot of people asking, and we talked about this on this podcast, on our main Behind the Numbers podcast many times, kind of like, what happens if I pull back on my ad spending? Obviously, there were a bunch of brands that did that were forced to do that chose to do that, even for a brief period. And we've also heard, aside from just the pandemic, general questions like, what happens if I stop spending? Or what happens if I boycott Facebook, for example, right? Now, one piece of the answer to that question is what are other advertisers doing? You know, your brand isn't just out there in the world trying to influence consumers in isolation. There's also other marketers trying to gain market share for themselves. So Analytic Partners research has found that if your brand has a similarly sized competitor and your competitor doubled its advertising and promotions budgets, your brand would lose out even if it didn't do anything differently, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, we look to what we call the ROI Genome to help with these sorts of questions. And, the questions you mentioned, like what happens if we pull back on Facebook or different types of marketing investment in general, that's exactly the sort of thing we can help our clients with. And so, the ROI Genome is kind of our collective intelligence of understanding what drives business performance across brands across the globe. And so, yeah, we found that, if a competitor were to double its advertising and promotion budgets, the average brand would stand to lose about 15% of its overall business. Certainly the activities that you take as a brand and as a marketer for your business are going to be more impactful for your business than what the competition does. But it's important to keep in mind the competition because they do influence your business. And so that's one of the reasons why we kind of wanted to highlight that is it's important to scenario plan, especially when we think about forecasting and understanding growth. And certainly that was a key area both last year as well as, this year in kind of the recovery from COVID. So we've been kind of leaning into and discussing with our clients in a lot of different ways about what does recovery look like. And, many of our clients are actually thriving in light of what's going on. And we have other clients that, have been struggling quite a bit. So really kind of piecing together what's impacting their business and the controllable and the non-controllable factors. And competition is one of those things that you don't really have much control over. So what we really wanted to emphasize was just that, wargaming and understanding and thinking through different scenario planning is important. We also, one of the questions that we had last year was when COVID hit and there was a lot of concern over a recession coming, a lot of brands were pulling back on advertising. And it's not necessarily the right thing to do either in the short term or the long term for most brands. Certainly there's a role for that for some brands, but we did quantify that, if the average brand chose to reduce its media spending by $50 million, that brand would on average stood to lose about $130 million in revenue just in that year alone. And when you factor in the longer term implications of the reduction, the number actually increases to well over $300 million in that year and beyond. So pretty sizable implications. And I think some of it is also just giving confidence and credence to the fact that advertising does play a pretty significant and important role in driving business performance and sales.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the kind of funny thing about it is you sort of have to ask yourself, like, well, if I thought stopping spending on advertising would have no effect, then wow, I've been wasting a lot of money up till now, maybe, right? Right. But like the effect that you just mentioned seems really significant to me. Pulling back on $50 million and losing much more than that in potential sales. Does it make you wonder why so many people had this question last year? Like, what happens if I stop spending when that's a big effect and it should be maybe more obvious?
It's a good point. Yeah, sometimes I think it, depending on the brand, we do, certainly want to provide the right advice. I think a big part of it is just really understanding with a high degree of confidence what's driving your business, right? So that measurement practice is really important because it helps you have the ability to make some of these decisions. And not everything is about sales. We know that, we need to focus on profitability. There's other implications, investing in innovation and things like that. So certainly there are different places we can be investing in, whether it's, changing or increasing route to market, reaching consumers in different ways in light of, a drive towards e-commerce. So understanding all those dynamics. But the one thing we can do with a high degree of confidence is highlight just what the implications are of pulling back so that we can make better decisions as to, okay, should we do that or not in light of recognizing now that we can quantify it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. So, not only is your brand not out there in the marketplace alone, like we were just talking about, no one piece of your brand's messaging is out there in isolation either. There are ads and marketing messages across different channels. There are ads for various products or services, and the effects of these messages get very intertwined, right? How can advertisers understand the effects of ads beyond just the call to action of that given ad?
Yeah, no, great question. Certainly advertising works together, and there's no experience with the brand that works on its own. They all work together, different types of messaging, different types of creative, different types of platforms, and the experience with the brand or service itself as well, and the experience you have. So it's really important to kind of acknowledge and understand that, and then be able to understand and measure the impact, both in isolation and in combination with the other activities, how it influences your business. And I think the call to action part that you asked about is an important one, because there is in the industry kind of a belief that looking at the last click and things like that can be informative in understanding the impact of marketing and promotions, but it's misleading, and it's important to kind of recognize that. So, for example, we know that 2/3 of the impact of advertising happens after the week that the advertising is on air. So advertising has a lasting effect on business performance, and that's just the short-term effect as well. So, if there's an impression out in the marketplace today, certainly there's an immediate reaction from a portion of consumers, but many of them won't necessarily change their behavior immediately and drop everything and run to behave the way that the advertising is seeking for them to behave. So, and then you have like direct and indirect effects too. So when you see an ad on TV and that prompts you to go search for a product, you need to make sure that you understand those things are connected and the credit is given where credit is due. And so that's a big part of making sure that measurement practices are holistic and can take into account those direct and indirect effects. Another one's halo too. So especially when we talk about call to action and looking at kind of the performance metrics, we know that half of the impacts of advertising are halo. And when I say halo, if we're advertising product X within our portfolio of products, a lot of times there's an impact onto products Y and Z as well, right? So under the same mega brand or same franchise. So being able to understand that advertising product X actually benefits products Y and Z within the franchise is really important as well. And we know that half of the impact of advertising is halo onto other products or services within the umbrella. So all of this is to say that, performance metrics are certainly important for us to leverage in some ways, but they can definitely be misleading. And so, looking at what's going on in terms of data deprecation in the marketplace now, in some ways, maybe it's not a bad thing that the data deprecation is happening, because I think it's going to encourage organizations to really understand some of the true drivers of their business performance, rather than looking at some of the more easily collected information that a lot of times can be misleading. So maybe forced to kind of truly dig a little bit deeper into understanding those direct and indirect effects.
Yeah, I think that'll be something that we're hoping for. You mentioned in their unified approach to measurement. Can you just clarify a little bit about what you mean there? Are you talking like kind of a combination of a top-down view with MMM with a bottom-up view from MTA, that type of thing?
I mean, unified can mean different things to different organizations. I think that terminology has been used at times to understand top-down and bottoms-up marketing mix modeling and similar types of analytics with multi-touch attribution and user-level data. But I would kind of add that I think unified, at least when Analytic Partners thinks about it, is much broader and more holistic in thinking about measurement. There is definitely, the role that MTA has played has been a little bit unclear in marketing measurement. We've been trying to drive home the understanding that, multi-touch attribution can certainly be valuable and help, but it is much more granular and kind of more tactical purposes rather than strategic, because you need to have a holistic measurement framework to be able to understand, should you be spending in advertising and how much should you be spending and what are the right marketing channels, because a lot of data is not available at a user level. Especially when we start to think about different types of marketing tactics and touch points. So, but when we think about unified measurement and Analytic Partners, we think about basically having analytics in place in a way that helps make business decisions and analytics that aligns with each other. So working to align different types of analytics. And it could be, commercial mix modeling, which is what we do, and, touchpoint analytics, or it could be also integrating customer segmentation. It could be about price and promotion analytics. So I think from our viewpoint, unified is a broader concept of making sure that you have strong measurement in place and that those measurement practices are talking to each other.
Fantastic. Awesome. Okay, so let me just take a break for a quick message from our sponsor, VTEX, and then I'll be back with Mike to talk more about advertising measurement. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to VTEX, VTEX.com/eMarketer to learn more. Okay, awesome. Back with Mike to talk more about advertising measurement and attribution. So Mike, let's talk a little bit about video advertising, which I feel like I spend a lot of time talking about, mostly because of how fast it's still growing. Advertisers are still, really hungry for digital video ads. And you at Analytic Partners have found that creative quality is particularly important to actually driving effectiveness in video advertising. So how can measurement and revenue attribution help marketers improve video creative?
Yeah, I guess first I'll just start off with the concept that you mentioned with video and how it's in demand. I think it's actually, from our perspective, a good thing because we do see video advertising works really well and consistently so. And I know that there's been an explosion of different types of platforms and different types of video advertising, emerging forms of video through OTT and connected TV, and traditional linear but I think it's important to highlight that, all these different types of video platforms work really well. And a big part of that is being able to tell a story to prospective clients and customers. So just wanted to highlight that. And we also see that actually video, along with social, has not only among the higher short-term ROIs, but also the highest long-term ROIs for marketing. So video is definitely an important element. And then within the world of video, we know that creative is important, and that may go without needing to be said, but creative is a really big factor in performance. And so we see a wide spectrum in performance. One of the elements, we see that about 2/3 of the effectiveness of advertising on video can be improved by improving creative. And there's different ways to do that. One of the things that we've seen is that brand messaging tends to outperform performance messaging. And we actually see that 80% of the time, which is a little bit of a surprise to some of our clients, because I think there's a natural belief that performance type messaging, that, buy now, buy here, that sort of I'm oversimplifying, obviously, but brand messaging that leans in a little bit more on the emotional side of things is more impactful in driving sales, as well as brand health and brand equity. So
I think that's so interesting, because I feel like one of the reasons that advertisers really have wanted more video on digital is because they do feel like it has such a huge impact from that branding perspective. The sight, sound, motion of video. I can tell a brand story so much better with video. And I think, thinking of some of the biggest video ad selling platforms like, YouTube, they've talked about how, although direct response is growing for them, historically, they have been really tilted more toward the brand side. So advertisers have been doing that. But yeah, for digital advertisers, definitely performance messaging is generally very popular and effective. Anyway, I'll let you keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And it's not to say performance messaging doesn't work. I think that's important to highlight as well. Performance messaging certainly can work, but really wanted to kind of emphasize just the importance of the brand messaging, because, like I said, most of the time, 80% of the time, it outperforms. So it's important to understand that creative has a pretty significant factor in the return on investment and the impact of your advertising. But the key is really to understand what type of creative works. And so what are the right types of messaging? What are the right types of audio cues or visual cues that associate with your brand? And making sure those are brought into the picture in addition to the story and the concept that you want to be communicating. So it's really important. And we've seen that time and time again, and getting an understanding of how that works for your business.
And are you able to, go as far as kind of parsing out which type of creative is going to work well on Facebook versus TV versus TikTok, for example?
Yeah, we've seen, and the type of creative can vary from business to business, because some brands are naturally promotional inclined. Some brands tend to be a little bit more, humor involved. Some may be more emotional, or so there's different kind of brand elements that already exist. And so certainly you want to play to your strengths to some extent, but incorporating brand messaging is important. One of the other things we've seen is that, brand and performance messaging can react differently in different settings and different platforms. So for example, we've seen that brand messaging tends to slightly outperform performance messaging on social media. So on Facebook, for example, we've seen upper funnel marketing can work just as well, if not better, than performance marketing. And we've seen it about 15% more effective and efficient in general. what's interesting is actually digital display is a little bit different, where performance marketing tends to outperform brand messaging by about the same amount, interestingly enough, about 15%. So just kind of speaking to I think some of that is the strengths of different types of platforms and settings. And I think retargeting plays a pretty significant role for display. And certainly you can retarget on social media, but social media, I think the power of generating reach and reaching new customers and consumers is also an important element on that platform I wanted to highlight.
Cool. So, we've been talking about some of the ways that marketing measurement and revenue attribution are complex. The interrelationships between all of the moving parts of a brand's marketing programs, plus the things its competitors are doing, plus, everything else in the world, the economy, the weather, so forth. How can marketers actually put it all together and also get insights from it all once it is all together? I don't want to underemphasize the difficulty of both pulling it all together and getting the insights.
Yeah, and then actioning the insights as well, right?
True.
Yeah. This is a whole nother concept that's important because, change management is an important element to be able to make sure that, brands are making the right decisions. So, it really starts with, from our perspective, understanding what really drives the business. And so the only way to really do that is with a holistic measurement framework. So something we do is called commercial mix analytics. And so really that's the foundation, because then you get an understanding of your controllable and your non-controllable factors, your online and your offline dynamics, and whether it's traffic or sales or time spent on site. There's different types of KPIs, but really getting a holistic understanding of your controllable, your non-controllable, your online and offline, your direct and indirect effects. And then, adding another layer, which is, short-term and long-term, which is another important element, because one of the things we've seen with the ROI Genome is that lower funnel focused marketing strategies tend to have a slightly higher ROI in the short term, about 21% higher. But when we think about the longer term, we see that upper funnel focused marketing strategies actually have a 65% higher return on investment in the long term. So now we need to solve for different competing KPIs. Sometimes we need to focus on the short term. Sometimes we should be thinking more about the long term. And that's where that kind of change management comes into play, and balancing different goals. And just to add complexity to that, of course, there's goals for, certain brands within a franchise, and then the mega brand or multiple brands that we may be offering to the marketplace. So, but it really starts with that kind of holistic measurement framework, so that you have this understanding and a foundation for what's driving the business. And from there, you can test and learn and create different strategies to experiment, knowing what's most likely to succeed and being able to test those things. And then certainly as new emerging forms of advertising and other elements come to play, and pandemics hit or boycotts happen, you have the foundation to be able to make, knowledgeable decisions based upon, very strong analytics to be able to improve business performance. So that's a lot of what we focus on with our clients is kind of using that business understanding to help create, different scenario planning for growth. And, we see kind of this type of work, analytics in general, more as a journey. It's not like an analytics study and we get an answer and okay, ROI is X for this and Y for that, and X is higher, so let's do more of that. It's much more nuanced and complicated than that, because it's really about piecing together different types of insights and then working with management to make sure that they're understanding some of the trade-offs and being able to talk through them and simulate them.
Yeah, very interesting. And, to the point about change management, I imagine this means that it's, critical to have some kind of a top-down buy-in so that you're able to align your organization around the right KPIs for the business ultimately.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yep. So that's a big part of what we focus on actually is, the getting the data and getting the analytics. That's certainly challenging in different ways, but then also just working with the organization to understand, where there's natural beliefs and skepticism and working across functions so that, finance is bought in and can understand the pros and cons of making different types of decisions and aligning everybody towards a common goal or set of goals. Absolutely.
Yeah. Which, that's what you're getting together an organization to do, right? So it makes a ton of sense. And this has been super interesting. Unfortunately, that's all that we have time for on today's episode of the Behind the Numbers ad platform, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. Mike, thank you so much for chatting today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And thanks to you all for listening. I'll be back next week with the next episode of The Ad Platform. And in the meantime, please continue to let us know what you think at podcast@eMarketer.com. Thanks.